Hello, my friends. Welcome back. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I used to believe libraries were safe places, quiet places, orderly. Shelves lined with knowledge, dust, and the faint smell of paper aging gracefully. When the world felt too loud, I would retreat to them, confident that nothing truly bad could happen in a place dedicated to preserving words. That belief died on a Tuesday night. I remember the exact time because the digital clock above the reference desk flickered before settling on 8:47 p.m. The library was scheduled to close at 9. I had come in late, hoping to finish research for a freelance article I was already behind on. My phone battery was nearly dead, so I ignored the nagging voice in my head telling me to pack up and leave early. The building was nearly empty. A few students sat scattered across the main floor, their faces lit by laptop screens. Somewhere deeper inside the building, a printer whined, then went silent. The overhead lights hummed softly, not loud enough to notice unless you focused on them. I focused on them a lot. At around 8:52, an announcement crackled over the intercom. "Attention patrons, the library will be closing in 10 minutes. Please bring your materials to the front desk." The voice sounded wrong, not distorted, just tired, as if whoever spoke had been repeating the same sentence for decades without rest. I gathered my notebook and laptop, slipping them into my backpack. As I stood, I noticed something odd. No one else moved. The students stayed seated, eyes locked on their screens, fingers still typing. No shuffling of chairs, no zipping backpacks. It was as if the announcement hadn't happened. I told myself they were wearing headphones. I wish that explanation had held. On my way toward the front desk, I passed one of the long study tables. A young man sat there, hunched over a thick hardcover book. The title was stamped in faded gold lettering, but the words didn't look like any language I recognized. Out of habit, I glanced at his face. His eyes were bleeding, not dramatically. No streams down his cheeks, just thin, dark lines slipping from the corners of his eyes and soaking into the pages beneath his gaze. He didn't blink, didn't react. I stopped walking. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I waited for him to notice me, to react, to do something that would make this normal. He turned a page, the blood smudged, spreading like ink in water. I backed away slowly, my shoes making barely a sound on the carpet. I didn't run. I didn't scream. Some deep instinctive part of me understood that drawing attention would be a mistake. At the front desk, the librarian was missing. Her chair was empty, pushed back as if she'd stood up quickly. A stack of returned books sat neatly beside the scanner. The clock above her flickered again. 8:59 p.m. The lights dimmed, not off, just lower. The shadows between the shelves deepened, stretching unnaturally long. The hum of the lights dropped in pitch, like the building itself was exhaling. Then, the intercom came on again. "The library's now closed." The voice was closer this time, not louder, closer. I turned toward the exit. The doors were gone. Where the glass double doors should have been, there was only more shelving. Floor-to-ceiling books packed tightly together, spines pressed against one another like they were hiding something. My stomach dropped. I walked closer, touching the shelf where the door used to be. Solid wood, dusty, real. Behind me, something shifted. I spun around. The main floor was empty. Every table, every chair, vacant. The students were gone, their laptops and bags gone with them, as if they'd never existed at all. Except for the man with the bleeding eyes. He stood at the end of the nearest aisle now, book clutched to his chest. "You shouldn't read while it's feeding," he said. His voice echoed, though the room was full of shelves that should have absorbed the sound. "What?" I whispered. He smiled, and his teeth were stained black like old ink. "You were supposed to leave," he continued, "but now you're cataloged." The lights flickered again. Suddenly, the shelves began to move, not sliding, rotating, entire aisles turning on invisible hinges, rearranging themselves with the sound of grinding wood and rusted metal. The familiar layout of the library twisted into something maze-like and wrong. I ran. I don't know how long I ran. Time stopped making sense. My watch spun wildly on my wrist, hands twitching back and forth like a trapped insect. Every aisle looked the same. Books whispered as I passed them. At first, it sounded like pages brushing against one another. Then I began to hear words. My name, my childhood nickname, things I had never told anyone. I reached an aisle that wasn't there before. A single desk sat beneath a dim lamp. Behind it was a massive ledger, its pages yellowed and thick. On the open page was my name, my full name. Below it was a date, today's date, and a blank space beside the word status. A pen lay beside the book, its tip wet with something dark. Behind me, the whispering grew louder. "You can leave," a voice said gently, right beside my ear. "You just need to finish your entry." I turned slowly. The librarian stood there, or what used to be her. Her mouth was sewn shut with black thread. Her eyes were gone entirely, replaced by printed letters, tiny lines of text scrolling endlessly where pupils should have been. She took my hand and guided it toward the pen. "First-person accounts are our favorite," she said. "They feel more honest." I yanked my hand away and stumbled backward, crashing into the desk. The ledger slid, and for a moment I saw other names, thousands of them, some scratched out, some circled, some still bleeding through the page. I grabbed the book and threw it across the aisle. The library screamed. Every shelf shook violently. Books fell, hitting the floor with heavy, wet thuds. The lights flared blinding white, then went dark. In the chaos, I ran again. This time, I didn't stop. I don't remember finding the exit. I don't remember the doors opening. I only remember cold air hitting my face and falling forward onto concrete. When I woke up, I was outside the library. Morning sunlight poured over the building. People walked past me, stepping around my body like I was just another inconvenience. The doors were back. A security guard asked if I was okay. I told him I must have fallen asleep studying too late. He laughed and said it happened all the time. Before I left, I looked back. Through the glass doors, I saw the librarian at her desk. She was smiling. On my way home, I checked my notebook. Inside, written in my handwriting, was a single sentence I don't remember writing. "If you're reading this, it's already open." I don't go to libraries anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I hear pages turning behind my walls, and something whispering my name, like it's checking to see if I've finished my story yet. The first thing you should understand about the library is that it never sleeps. It pretends to, of course. The lights dim, the doors lock. The city outside breathes and moves on. But inside, something is always awake. I learned that the night I volunteered to inventory the basement archives, something no one else would touch, the job paid well, too well in hindsight. I'd been unemployed for 3 months when the posting appeared online. Temporary overnight archival assistant, no experience required, discretion necessary. The address was the old municipal library downtown, the one people avoided because of the persistent smell of mildew and the way cell service dropped the moment you stepped inside. The interview lasted less than 5 minutes. The head librarian, a woman with paper-thin skin and hands that trembled constantly, asked me only one question. "Do you consider yourself memorable?" I laughed, assuming it was a joke, and said no. She smiled in a way that felt like relief. That should have been my warning. I arrived at 11:40 p.m. on my first shift. The building was dark except for a single light above the circulation desk. The librarian unlocked the door without speaking and handed me a brass key labeled B. "The basement," she said. "Don't remove anything, don't write anything down, and if you hear someone calling you, it isn't for you." Before I could ask what that meant, she locked the door behind me. The stairwell to the basement was narrow and steep, carved from stone that felt older than the building itself. The air grew colder with each step, thick with dust and something else, something dry and faintly sweet, like decaying paper. The basement lights flickered on automatically. What I saw made my stomach tighten. The room was enormous, far larger than the footprint of the library above. Shelves stretched into darkness, packed with books that were unlabeled, unnumbered, and wildly inconsistent in size. Some were bound in leather. Others looked handmade, stitched with thread or wire. A few moved slightly, as if adjusting themselves. I told myself it was stress. At the center of the room stood a long wooden table with a single object resting on it, a mirror, not a normal mirror. Its surface was cloudy, like breath trapped beneath glass, and it was framed in tarnished silver engraved with symbols I didn't recognize. Beside it lay a note, "Inventory confirmation required. Simply look." I should have left. Instead, I stepped closer. The mirror did not reflect the room. It reflected me, but wrong. My face lagged a second behind my movements. When I raised my hand, the reflection smiled before I did. Its eyes were sharper, more focused, as if it knew something I didn't. I stepped back. The reflection did not. It leaned forward, pressing its palm against the glass from the other side. I felt a pressure against my own hand, cold and tingling, though I hadn't touched the mirror. A whisper filled the basement, not words. At first, just a sound like pages being erased. Then the shelves began to hum. Names floated through the air, spoken softly, lovingly, mournfully. Thousands of them. Each name tugged at something inside my chest, as though I should recognize them. I staggered away from the table. The lights flickered, and suddenly, I wasn't alone. Figures stood between the shelves, dozens of them. They were human-shaped but incomplete, like memories half-formed. Some had no faces. Others had faces blurred smooth, like wet clay. A few wore outdated clothing, their outlines flickering as if they couldn't decide which era they belonged to. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at the mirror. "Inventory," one of them whispered. Another shook its head violently, hands pressed to its temples. "I was a teacher," it said, voice breaking. "I think." Something brushed past my leg. I looked down. A child, at least the shape of one, clung to my coat. Where its eyes should have been were blank white pages. "Do you remember me?" it asked. I screamed and ran. The stairwell was gone. In its place was another aisle, shelves bending inward like ribs. The basement had rearranged itself, not aggressively but patiently, like it knew I would search for familiarity and find none. I tried my phone. No signal, no time. The screen showed nothing but my own reflection, staring back at me with that same knowing smile. The whispering grew clearer. "They're not lost," a voice said calmly. "They're archived." I turned. The head librarian stood behind me, perfectly still. In the basement light, she looked younger, stronger, less human. "What is this place?" I demanded. "A retention system," she replied. "For the forgotten." She gestured to the shelves. People slip through the cracks every day. Unrecorded lives, unnoticed deaths, stories that never get told. The world has no place for them, so we made one. My mouth went dry. "And the mirror," she smiled. "That's how we find out if you belong here. The figures began to move closer. "You said you weren't memorable," she continued gently. "That made you eligible. But eligibility isn't confirmation." I backed away until my spine hit a shelf. "What happens if I fail?" She tilted her head. "You won't notice. That's the kindness of it." The mirror appeared beside me again, resting against the shelf as if it had always been there. "Look," the librarian said. I shook my head. "Look," she repeated more firmly. The figures surrounded me now, their blank faces tilted upward, expectant. I looked. This time, the reflection wasn't wrong. It was empty. The mirror showed the basement, the shelves, the figures, the librarian, but not me. I stepped side to side. Nothing. My reflection was gone. A deep, satisfied sound rippled through the room. "Confirmed," the librarian said. The figures relaxed. Some slumped to the floor. Others drifted back to the shelves, their outlines fading as books slid open to receive them. "What does that mean?" I whispered. She took the brass key from my hand. "It means you are never going to be missed." The floor beneath me softened, turning thick and fibrous like layered paper pulp. My legs sank into it slowly. I screamed, fought, clawed, but my hands left no marks. As I sank, I felt memories slipping away. My mother's face, my last name, the sound of my own voice. The last thing I remembered was the librarian leaning down and placing a book gently against my chest. Blank cover, blank spine. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't work the same way on the shelf. I am aware, but faintly. Like a thought half finished, sometimes someone opens me. When they do, I feel air again, feel eyes pass over my pages. They never linger. There's nothing remarkable about my story. That's why it worked. That's why I'm still here. If you ever visit the old municipal library and wander into the basement, you might see a thin, unlabeled book wedged between thousands of others. You won't read it. You won't remember touching it, and neither will anyone else. That's how the library keeps growing. The library had one rule no one talked about, not officially. It wasn't posted on a sign or mentioned during orientations, but everyone who worked there knew it, and everyone avoided breaking it. Never stay during the quiet hour. I learned about it by accident. I'd been working as a page for only 2 weeks, reshelving books and helping lost patrons find sections that hadn't been updated since the 90s. The library was old, older than it looked, and poorly funded. Clocks never agreed with each other. The elevators sometimes skipped floors. And once, I swear I saw sunlight pouring in through the windows at midnight. When I asked my supervisor about these things, she told me the same thing every time. "Libraries remember things people forget," she said. "That's all." The quiet hour, she explained, happened unpredictably, usually late at night, sometimes in the early afternoon, once even during a children's reading event. "When it starts," she said, "you leave, even if you're in the middle of something, especially then." I asked what happened if you didn't. She just shook her head. The quiet hour found me on a Thursday. I'd volunteered to cover a closing shift after someone called in sick. It was nearly 10:30 p.m. and the last patrons had already filtered out. I was alone on the second floor, pushing a cart of books toward the history section. That's when the sound changed. Libraries are never truly silent. There's always the low hum of air circulation, the faint buzz of lights, the distant city noise bleeding through walls. All of it stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The silence was so complete it hurt my ears like pressure building underwater. I froze mid-step, one hand still resting on the cart. Then I heard it. A single, deliberate click. Every clock in the library ticked at once. I checked my watch. The second hand wasn't moving. I swallowed. The quiet hour. I turned to leave and realized I couldn't remember where the stairs were. The second floor had changed, not visibly, but subtly. The aisles felt longer. The shelves stood straighter, cleaner, like they'd just been restored. Books that should have been worn were pristine, their spines uncreased, their titles sharper. A soft amber light filled the space, though none of the lamps were on. I walked slowly, heart hammering. "Hello?" I called. My voice didn't echo. Instead, it sounded like it had been absorbed, pulled downward into the floor. I passed a reading table. Someone was sitting there. A man, middle-aged, wearing a brown jacket. He was reading calmly, flipping pages at a steady pace. Relief flooded me. "Hey," I said quietly. "The library's closed. We need to—" He looked up. It was my father. Not as he is now, as he was the last day I saw him alive. I staggered back, nearly tripping over my own feet. "No," I whispered. "This isn't—" He smiled, tired and familiar. "You're late," he said. "I've been waiting." My father died 12 years ago. Car accident, hit and run. I was supposed to call him that night. I didn't. I was busy. I figured I'd call the next day. There was no next day. "You shouldn't be here," I said, my voice shaking. He closed the book gently. "This is where I come when there's nothing else to do," he replied. "Where else would I wait?" The book in front of him had no title. "What is this place?" I asked. "The Hour You Never Used," he said. The silence deepened. I noticed then that the books around us weren't normal. Their spines weren't labeled with titles or authors. They were labeled with times. 3:12 p.m., missed call, 11:47 p.m., said, tomorrow 6:03 a.m., almost apologized. My throat tightened. I backed away, knocking into a shelf. A book slid free and fell open at my feet. Inside were pages filled with handwriting. Mine. Every word I'd never said, every conversation I'd avoided, every moment I chose comfort over honesty. "Put it back," my father said gently. "I don't want this," I whispered. "No one does," he replied, "but everyone makes it." I ran. The library unfolded endlessly, aisle after aisle marked by moments instead of genres. I saw strangers crying at tables, whispering to people who weren't there. I saw a woman screaming at an empty chair. I saw a teenager holding a book and laughing hysterically, blood running from his nose. None of them noticed me. All of them were trapped in their own hours. I finally found a desk, one I recognized, the reference desk. Behind it sat me, older, paler, exhausted. He looked up and smiled. "Don't waste it," he said. "Waste what?" I demanded. He slid a small card across the desk. "Quiet hour access. One use." "You can leave," he said, "or you can fix one thing." My hands trembled. "One?" I asked. "That's the rule." "What happens if I stay?" He shrugged. "You become very well read." I thought of my father, of the phone call, of all the things I'd replayed in my head for years. "Will it change anything?" I asked. He didn't answer. I took the card. The shelves rearranged themselves into a single path, leading back to the table where my father waited. He looked up as I approached. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said. I sat across from him. "I'm sorry," I said immediately. "I should have called. I should have told you." He raised a hand. "That's not how it works." The book between us opened on its own. The pages were blank. "You don't speak here," he said softly. "You choose." Images flooded my mind. The phone vibrating in my pocket, me ignoring it, the car crash, the hospital room. Then the moments split, branching outward like a torn page. I saw myself answering the call, laughing, arguing, hanging up annoyed, still alive. My chest tightened. Even calling him wouldn't have saved him. "I can't fix this," I whispered. "No," he agreed, "but you can keep it." The card burned in my hand. I understood then. The quiet hour wasn't about correction, it was about acceptance. I placed the card on the table. "I'm done," I said. My father smiled, proud and sad all at once. "That's my time," he said. The silence shattered. Sound rushed back in violently. Air, electricity, distant traffic. The lights snapped on. The shelves snapped back into place. I was on the second floor, gripping a book cart. My watch ticked forward, 10:31 p.m. The library was normal. I finished my shift in a daze and went home. Life went on. But something had changed. The guilt was still there, but quiet now, contained, filed away where it belonged. Years later, I still visit the library. Sometimes, during quiet moments, I feel the air still itself for just a second, and I leave. Some hours don't want to be reopened, and some stories don't need another ending. The library was famous for being quiet, but that was never true. If you stayed long enough, really stayed, past the polite silence and into the hours when your ears adjusted, you could hear it breathing. Pipes clicking, walls settling, the soft friction of air through vents. I found it comforting. Noise meant the building was alive. What I didn't know was that the library was also listening. I worked there as an audio archivist, which meant my job was to preserve things most people forgot even existed. Cassette tapes, vinyl records, oral histories stored on degrading formats, voices of people long dead, laughter warped by time, interviews where the pauses said more than the words. The library kept these materials in a sub-level called Media Storage C. No windows, thick concrete walls, perfect acoustics, too perfect. On my third month working there, I noticed a sound that didn't belong. A hum, not electrical, not mechanical, organic. Low and steady, like a throat clearing endlessly somewhere far away. I first heard it while digitizing an old reel-to-reel tape from the 1960s. I thought it was interference until I stopped the recording. The hum continued. I took my headphones off. Still there. When I mentioned it to my supervisor, he frowned like I'd told him I smelled smoke. "Media C?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't ask follow-up questions. He just said, "Log it as structural noise," and changed the subject. That was my second warning. The hum got louder over time, not perceptibly louder, no sudden change, but more present. Like once I noticed it, my brain refused to let it fade into the background. It followed me through the stacks. It vibrated faintly through my desk. Sometimes, late at night, I felt it in my teeth. I began recording it. At first, the waveform was simple, a steady low-frequency band. But as days passed, patterns emerged. Rises, falls, pauses, rhythm. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I ran the hum through a spectrogram. Words appeared, not spoken words, shapes, repeating structures too deliberate to be random, like language stripped of sound and rebuilt out of vibration. I told myself I was overthinking it. That night, I dreamed of shelves bending inward, their spines fluttering like gills. I woke up humming. Media Storage C was connected to the main library by a long corridor lined with reference books no one ever touched. One evening, while walking through it, the hum suddenly stopped. The silence was violent. I froze mid-step. Then I heard something new. Scratching. It came from inside the walls, soft at first, like fingernails on cardboard, then dozens of overlapping movements, shifting and circling, as if something small and numerous was rearranging itself just beneath the surface. I backed away slowly. A book slid off the shelf in front of me. It hit the floor and split open. Inside wasn't text, it was filled with thin, pale strands, like fishing lines soaked in milk. They twitched when exposed to air, recoiling slightly, then reaching again. I gagged and kicked the book away. The hum returned immediately, louder than ever, almost pleased. I ran. After that, the library changed. Not physically, not in ways anyone else seemed to notice, but acoustically. Sounds bent wrong. Footsteps echoed too long. Pages turned with a wet, fibrous whisper. When patrons spoke above a murmur, their voices seemed to sink into the walls instead of carrying through the room. Complaints started coming in. Headaches, ringing ears, feeling watched. One woman claimed the children's section was whispering nursery rhymes backward. Management blamed stress, renovations, old wiring. Media storage C was quietly removed from public maps. I was told to keep working. The hum started responding to me. That's the only way I can describe it. When I walked into the room, it deepened. When I stopped moving, it softened. Once, when I pressed my ear to the concrete wall, it shifted pitch, matching my breathing. I whispered without thinking. "Hello?" The hum stuttered. Then, for the first time, something answered. Not a voice. A vibration, precise and intentional, traveled through the wall and into my skull. My vision blurred, my teeth chattered, and suddenly, I understood. The library wasn't haunted, it was nesting. I don't know how long it had been there. Decades, maybe longer. Something that lived in sound the way parasites live in flesh. It fed on recorded voices, absorbed them, broke them down into usable patterns. The library was perfect for it. Quiet, dense, full of stored sound and human attention. Books were only the shell. The real food was us. I started noticing thin cracks along the walls of Media C. Inside them, those pale strands writhed, weaving into thicker chords. They pulsed in time with the hum. One night, a tape jammed in the recorder. When I opened the machine, the tape was gone. In its place was a mass of fibrous threads, warm to the touch, vibrating gently, as if purring. I threw up in the sink. The hum swelled, filling the room until my vision swam. I realized then that it wasn't just feeding anymore. It was learning. I tried to leave. The exit door from Media C wouldn't open, not locked, just unresponsive, like it no longer recognized my hand. My keycard reader blinked red, then went dark. The hum dropped to a near-silent frequency that pressed against my thoughts. Stay. The word wasn't heard. It was felt. I screamed. The sound didn't echo. It vanished the moment it left my mouth, swallowed by the walls. The strands poured from the cracks. Then, hundreds of them, spilling across the floor like living cables. They wrapped around my ankles, not tight, just enough to anchor me. I felt them inside my ears, inside my nose, inside my throat. The pain came later. First came the sound. Every voice the library had ever held poured into me at once, overlapping, compressing, forcing themselves into the spaces where my thoughts used to be. I dropped to my knees. The hum climbed into a deafening crescendo, and then silence. When I woke up, I was lying on the main floor of the library. Morning light streamed through the windows. Patrons walked by. Someone coughed. A book cart rattled. Everything was normal, too normal. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. I panicked until I realized I didn't need to. Every sound around me was inside me already, cataloged, stored, understood. I stood. My reflection in the glass was wrong. Not monstrous, not obvious, but subtly blurred, like a bad recording played too many times. Media storage C was gone. Where the corridor had been was now a new section, freshly labeled, audio reference, staff only. I knew without being told what my job was now. I didn't leave the library. I couldn't, because every time someone spoke inside it, Every time a page turned, or a child laughed, or a student whispered to themselves while studying, I felt it, and the hum deep inside me grew stronger. The library is still quiet, but now it hums in my voice. The library had always been too big for its neighborhood. That was the first thing people noticed. Wedged between a laundromat and a closed pharmacy, it should have been modest, 2 floors at most. Instead, it rose 5 stories high, its stone facade cracked and sagging as if it had grown heavier than intended. Inside, no one ever complained about crowding. There was always space. I was hired as a facilities inspector after the city received complaints about structural inconsistencies. Doors opening into rooms that seemed too large, emergency maps that didn't align with reality. One man insisted he'd walked for 20 minutes straight without reaching the end of an aisle. The city blamed renovations. They sent me. I arrived on a Monday morning with a clipboard, a laser measurer, and the quiet confidence of someone who believes buildings obey rules. The head librarian barely looked up when I introduced myself. "Measure whatever you like," she said. "Just don't move the shelves." "Why not?" I asked. She met my eyes for the first time. "They're load-bearing," she said. "Shelves, load-bearing." I laughed awkwardly. She didn't. The first floor checked out fine. So did the second. Old, uneven, but nothing alarming. The third floor, however, was where things began to drift. The East Wing reading room measured 42 feet wide from the inside. From the outside, the building only had 36 feet available. I measured again. Same result. I checked adjacent rooms. Their dimensions were normal, as if the extra space existed only where I was standing, like a pocket folded into the building's interior. I wrote it down, frowning. By the 4th floor, the anomalies multiplied. Hallways stretched longer than their external walls allowed, corners bent slightly inward, forcing shelves to lean at imperceptible angles. When I stood still, I sometimes felt a subtle pressure behind my eyes, like depth perception failing. Still, nothing felt overtly hostile, just wrong. The 5th floor wasn't on the public map. I found it by accident, following a staircase that shouldn't have existed, its steps worn smooth as if used often despite leading nowhere obvious. At the top was a sign. Stacks, restricted. No lock. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. The 5th floor was enormous, not just larger than expected, larger than the rest of the building combined. The ceiling arched so high it vanished into shadow. Rows of shelves extended in every direction, evenly spaced, mathematically perfect. No windows, no desks, no people, just shelves. And something else. At first, I thought it was vibration, a faint tremor beneath my feet like a train passing underground. But the sensation didn't fade. It pulsed, slowly, rhythmically. The shelves flexed with it, barely noticeable but real, as if the floor itself were expanding and contracting, breathing. I swallowed and stepped forward. My footsteps sounded wrong, too soft, as though the floor absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. I checked my laser measurer. It returned an error. I tried again. The numbers scrambled wildly, flickering between impossible values before going blank. That's when I noticed the books. They were identical. Same height, same thickness, same blank gray spines. No titles, no authors, no where. I pulled one free. It was heavier than it should have been. Inside were diagrams, not words, cross-sections, shapes layered within shapes, rooms inside rooms, corridors folding back on themselves. A crude human silhouette appeared on several pages, always drawn too small, positioned inside vast hollow spaces. On the final page was a simple note: observation subject, mobile. My skin crawled. I became aware of perspective shifting. The farther I walked, the more the shelves seemed to lean inward, not collapsing, but curving subtly, like the inside of a massive rib cage. Distances warped. An aisle that looked close took minutes to reach. Others vanished when I tried to retrace my steps. The pulsing grew stronger. I realized then that the space wasn't expanding randomly. It was adjusting around me. I stopped walking. The pulsing slowed. I took a step. It resumed. Curious, against every survival instinct, I raised my arms. The shelves nearest me widened their spacing. I crouched. The ceiling dropped slightly. The realization hit me with nauseating clarity. The library wasn't broken. It was measuring. A sound rippled through the stacks. Not a voice, not movement. A shift in pressure, like standing too close to something enormous turning its attention toward you. The space ahead of me deepened, stretching farther than sight allowed. Shelves bent away, creating a vast hollow. Something moved within it, not a shape, an absence, like a blind spot in reality where depth collapsed inward. I couldn't see it, but my brain insisted it was there, the way you know when someone is standing behind you without turning around. I backed away. The shelves followed, not chasing, recentering. I ran. The floor softened, stretching beneath my feet. Distance lost meaning. My lungs burned as if I were sprinting in place. Then I tripped. When I looked up, I was no longer alone. It didn't have a form I could describe. No limbs, no face, just a region of distorted space hovering above the floor, pulsing gently as if alive in a way that ignored biology entirely. Information flooded my mind, not words, not images, but intent. It wasn't hostile, it was curious. The library wasn't a place of storage, it was a lens, a containment field designed to allow something vast and incomprehensible to examine smaller realities without collapsing them. Books were ballast, shelves were scaffolding, humans were incidental. Except me. I wasn't supposed to be there. My presence had triggered recalibration. The thing reached toward me, not physically, but spatially. The air between us stretched thin, compressing me with invisible pressure. I screamed. The sound folded inward and disappeared. I felt myself being mapped. Every bone, every organ, every memory flattened into dimensions that didn't care about pain. Then it stopped, abruptly. The pressure released. The space recoiled. The entity withdrew, retreating into impossible depth. And I understood why. I wasn't useful. I was too small. The shelves began to close in, not violently but decisively. Aisles collapsed, merging into seamless walls. The vastness shrank, folding back into itself. I stumbled through a narrowing corridor and burst through a door I didn't remember opening. I was on the first floor. The librarian looked up. "You went upstairs," she said calmly. I couldn't speak. She sighed. "It does that sometimes." "What is it?" I finally whispered. She shook her head. "Not it, they." She stamped my inspection form without reading it. "Buildings don't just take up space," she said. "Some of them observe it." I left the library shaking. The city dismissed my report. Structural anomalies were within tolerance. No further investigation required. Life moved on. Except my apartment began to feel wrong. Rooms seemed deeper than before. Corners lingered too long in my peripheral vision. Sometimes, when I lay very still, I felt a familiar pulsing beneath the floor, as if something far away was adjusting, measuring. Last week, I noticed my hallway felt wider than it used to. Yesterday, I found a book on my table, blank spine, blank cover. Inside was a single diagram, a cross-section of my home, with me drawn very small inside it, and a note at the bottom of the page. Secondary observation site confirmed. I don't think the library let me go. I think it learned how to follow. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories.